but we just wanted to say good afternoon to all of you and express our great appreciation for having made time or making time to participate in this event. Those who are with us virtually and those who are with us, physically. So I think we're going to start with a small video to get us all to, introduce us into the material for this meeting, and then we'll get it going. So briefly, those connected online, if you don't see a video or any screen that is shared, let us know, give us some signal, so we'll try to correct that. You okay? Okay, Avanti.
I bambini sono il futuro della famiglia umana. A tutti noi spetta il compito di favorirne la crescita, la salute e la serenità. Privati del diritto di giocare, di studiare e di sognare. Tutti noi siamo responsabili di questo. Faccio appello alle istituzioni affinché pongano in essere ogni sforzo per proteggere i minori. Colmando le lacune economiche e sociali che stanno alla base della dinamica distorta nella quale essi sono purtroppo coinvolti.
So Father Dominic will lead us in a short opening prayer.
Nel nome del Padre, e del Figlio, e dello Spirito Santo. Loving God, you fill our world and every single human being with beauty and hope. We are grateful for your abiding presence throughout this prolonged pandemic, during which your grace has invited us to see all things new in Christ. Today, we gather to consider the suffering of so many children forced by poverty to work in hazardous circumstances, on plantations, in mines, in factories, or as domestic servants, while all along being deprived of their right to play, to learn, and to dream. As we strive to see, judge, and act together, help us to hear anew the words of Jesus. Let the children come to me, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. God of compassion, protect us from the virus of indifference or hopelessness. May we never forget that each child has a name, a face, a future. Each is created in your image and likeness. As we advocate for children's dignity, inspire our efforts with humility and hope, with constancy and courage. Gracious God, remain with us during our meeting today and fill our deliberations with your wisdom and love. Amen. En nome del Padre, el Figlio, e del Spirito Santo. Amen.
So thanks, Dominic, for introductory for a prayer. So, my dear friends, very Reverend Fathers, Monsignors, the distinguished guests, excellencies, and all among us. It's a great pleasure, of course, to welcome all of you to this Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, and on his behalf to wish this brief section a great success. By hosting this event, as the Pope hinted at, and as this morning's message, by the way, I did say that you would all get copies of the Pope's message. I think you do have them already. Okay, so you find time to read it and see the resonance of and the convergence of events that we carry. So by hosting this event, co-organized with a permanent mission of the Holy See to the Food and Agriculture Office, FAO, the Vatican Commission, together with the other agencies of the United Nations, UNICEF and IFAD and all, it is the simple and modest, purpose and objective of this dicastery, and especially its COVID commission, to take up the issue of jobs and to look at the areas of jobs which are badly affected by economic concerns that manifest itself to the level of reducing children to some kind of a servile service, and so what we call the child labor phenomenon. Our aim is simply to awaken conscience, express solidarity with children and families affected by child labor, but also to build trust and synergies among those who are engaged in this, whatever service in this area, to put an end to the child labor exploitation, child labor and the exploitation of children. So in a time like ours, afflicted by the COVID, and at the same time making tremendous experience of the progress of science, wealth and knowledge, technologies and all, we're still unfortunately witnessing these forms of exploitation that in some cases amount to contemporary forms of slavery. And several areas in life which are not expected to engage in practices like this, unfortunately do. We've had experience of people in diplomatic missions, embassies and all, who have brought in staff under the guise of having them work in a house, but on arrival, passports are taken and they're reduced to servile domestic forms of slavery. It's a great scandal that the opulent lifestyle of one part of humanity is well too often obtained at the cost of the dignity of the most fragile members of our human family, namely children. So how many children are employed and even exploited in agriculture, including fishing? And fishing is the area where in Ghana, we know about child labor. There's a huge artificial lake created by a dam in Ghana, and there's a lot of tilapia fishing on that lake, and that's where you find a lot of the child labor force in Ghana. And the last time we did this over here, the advocate came from that group, somebody who came out of that experience and has made himself an advocate against child labor in Ghana itself. Just as we're about to make another experience, listen to another experience this afternoon. So it's a question sometimes of asking ourselves, how many products that we consume or components of products that we have that are made through the exploitation of children? Pope Francis puts it nicely, saying that economies of this character kill, and no one shall remain indifferent in the face of the violations of the dignity of children wherever they happen, in whatever form they take, because we are all still members of the same human family. We all interconnected and interdependent. We are on the same boat, all of us important and needed, and all of us called to row together towards the full dignity of each one and the salvation of all. So we believe that the magnitude of this phenomenon requires cooperation at different levels, involving states, intergovernmental organizations, business communities, worker organizations, each through their own specific role and responsibilities. In the past, when we did organize a meeting like this with a CEO of mining companies, we verified this as present in the supply chain of several mining industries and companies and needed to address it at that level. Indeed, out of that, a company was born, which I think, Nassim will probably, talk about briefly in her own testimony this afternoon. So, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in adopting the Sustainable Development Goals, including targets 8 and 7, the international community committed itself, among other things, to take immediate and effective action to prohibit and eliminate the worst forms of child labor, including the recruitment and the use of child soldiers, and end child labor in all its forms. The Holy See, small as it is, but sometimes with big mouths, right? Can contribute to achieving this set goal. It's already begun this day with our small audience, which I hear is already in the newspapers. And so in this year, that has been declared by the United Nations General Assembly as the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. It is time to, I think, act together, to join forces, and to join our efforts to build a world where no child is forced to work and no child then is exposed to losing his or her childhood experience, and that all may grow in full dignity to realize what they were created to be, images and likenesses of God. So with these few words, we just want to welcome all of you to Dicastery and introduce you to the conversation that we're about to have, and encourage all of you to speak very freely. We just listened to a Pope who encourages everybody who comes together to speak freely. So speak freely, speak from your heart, from your guts, whatever you may feel like doing, and express yourself so that we can all benefit from the experiences that you come to this conversation with. So thank you again, and thank you for coming. And now we pass the piloting of this plane to a lady pilot, just finished her training, but it's accumulated a few hours of flight, Pedrajas, and so she's going to moderate the subsequent session.
Thank you very much, Eminence. Welcome, all of you. Now we have the honor to listen to the message of the Nobel Peace Prize, Kailas Satyarthi. Mr. Satyarthi has been a tireless advocate of children's rights globally for more than 4 decades. Through his organization, he has directly rescued more than 100,000 children from child labor, slavery, trafficking, and other forms of exploitation. He has also contributed to the development of international conventions on the rights of children. Let's listen to the message from Mr. Satyarthi.
My dear sisters and brothers, first of all, I would like to express my deepest gratitude and respect to the Holy Father for his compassion and call to action to end child labor. I'm also thankful to DPIHD for this very timely initiative. I know that the people assembled here have a light of compassion. They have this moral call to end this scourge of child labor. So I'm sure that this event will have the long-lasting impact. I recall an 11, 12-year-old girl, Meena, whom we freed from domestic child labor. We were shocked to see that she was living half naked, never allowed to leave that place, never given proper food, no medication, having scars and injuries on her body, badly traumatized, scared and frightened. Somehow we brought her to my home. I have given her some paper, pencils and colors to draw something, to express herself. And I was so happy to see in the evening that she drew a cross on that paper. Then we learned that she is a Christian. Next morning, we took her to a nearby church. And when she saw everyone and everything there, I saw the first smile on her face. She said that she is at home now. Dear friends, Jesus said, "Let the children come to me. Do not hinder them from the kingdom of God that belongs to them." But today I ask you, think of those 160 million children who are not free to do anything because they are trapped into child labor. We have to introspect. And then we have to challenge all those obstacles which hinder these children from being children. I freed many children, and each time when the smile of freedom appears on the face of a child, I could feel the glimpse of God. Each time when the mother who lost all her hope to get back her child, and she cries, the tears roll down on her face, tears of joy, bring me a feeling of God. Remember, poverty is no excuse for child labor, because child labor causes adult unemployment, vis-a-vis poverty, illiteracy, and ill health. We cannot achieve any of our development goals without ending child labor. But there is another dimension. When we look at sub-Saharan African region, which has more than half of child laborers in the world, institutional discrimination, racial discrimination, as well as the geopolitical discrimination with Africa is also a greater reason. Dear sisters and brothers, world is not so poor that cannot ensure childhood for every child. What is needed is strong actions and bold ideas. And one thing I have been suggesting is that every child should be guaranteed social protection. And this requires only $53 billion annually that will ensure social protection for every child and every pregnant woman in all low-income countries. This is less than 2 days of COVID-19 related expenditure in G7 countries last year, and less than 0.4% of social protection expenditure in Europe. Therefore, please raise your voice. You have that moral courage and power. I urge you to think as a mother, as a father, as a grandmother, as a grandfather, as a sister or brother of those children, because they are all our children. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Satyarthi. And finally, to complement this opening session, we have the privilege to listen to Mr. Máximo Torero, Chief Economist of the Food and Agriculture Organization, where he joined in 2019. Prior to joining FAO, he was director of the World Bank in several Latin American countries. We listen to his message.
His Holiness Pope Francis, government representatives, partners and colleagues, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Máximo Torero. I am the Chief Economist of FAO. And on behalf of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, I am honored to participate to this important event convened by the Dicastery for promoting integral human development. At the beginning of the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour, we have pledged to intensify our efforts to end child labor in agriculture. And we recently held a high-level Global Solutions Forum, acting together to end child labor in agriculture. We know where there is hunger, there is also an increased livelihood of child labor. In 2020, 811 million people are chronically undernourished. Compared with 2019, this is an increase in the range of 118 million people more who were facing hunger, in part of resulting from COVID-19 pandemic. This is really unacceptable. In addition to the many difficulties the pandemic has created in terms of food security and rural poverty, many children are at risk of falling or have already fallen into child labor. Safeguarding children's food security and ensuring nutritious and healthy diets for them is of utmost importance. It's our top priority. But we need also to feed their future. Children are the future generations holding the human potential to create more inclusive and sustainable agri-food systems. 70% of child labor is found in agriculture, according to ILO and UNICEF in 2021. During our recent high-level event, many solutions came from agri-food system stakeholders who are rarely heard when we talk about child labor elimination. But they hold the key for the future of agriculture and for food systems. This number is outrageous, 70%. We need to find ways to reduce this and to make it in such a way that is something sustainable. We need to and we can accelerate action to eliminate child labor. 72% of all child labor is unpaid family work, and children start to work in order to help their families as young as 6 years old, often engaging in hazardous tasks. We need to support rural families and communities in the agri-food systems by addressing root causes of child labor. And this includes poverty and hunger. So it's a structural issue. We need to help to reduce poverty and hunger, which has been exacerbated by COVID-19. Insufficient decent employment opportunities, so that the family members can earn the income they need. Lack of sufficient value given to education. The COVID-19 and the closure of schools because of the closures of the economies as a result of the pandemic and the lockdowns have increased enormously the amount of children that don't go to school, and this has also exacerbated child labor. So we need to find and make it intensify their efforts to make these kids return back to school. And this requires that they understand the value of education for their children. Fourth, we have outdated labor demanding and hazardous farming practices. And we need to find them. We need to find new innovations and use new technologies to resolve this problem. And finally, we need to reduce economic vulnerability to shocks. So these 5 elements are central, and all of them are structural: poverty and hunger, insufficient decent employment opportunities, lack of sufficient value given to education, outdated labor demanding and hazardous farming practices, and economic vulnerabilities and shocks. And the last one, of course, is related also to climate change and to the variability of weather conditions that will happen, which will also put an extremely constraint and stress on these households, which are already poor and are already going through this problem. Collaboration among the stakeholders, regional bodies, and national governments to develop and implement policies, strategies, and programs focused on ending child labor in agriculture, including through investments in sustainable agri-food systems and social protection for the rural poor, can make a real difference. Increasing responsible financial investments in agriculture can go a long way towards solving some of the present vulnerabilities in rural areas, as well as those exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change. It's important to understand that when there is an emergency and when there is a risk of a famine, we need to react immediately. We need to provide food immediately. But we need to work at the same time to make this solution sustainable. Food aid is not a sustainable solution. It's an emergency solution. And child labor is a structural problem in the rural areas in the agricultural sector. So even in conflict zones, in emergencies, in countries which are going in significant risks of famine, we need to work at the same time to increase the sustainability by bringing all the solutions that I mentioned before to try to resolve this problem of child labor at the same time. It is also essential to support young people to prepare for the future of work through relevant education and skill development, particularly in rural areas, and to provide them with decent job employment opportunities. We need to create aspirations on them. We need them to return to schools after COVID-19. So prioritizing a stakeholder partnership by building and sharing knowledge and data to inform the right strategy is yet another effective pathway. FAO is committed to four betters, for better future, as set out in our new strategic framework. These four betters will guide out our work on the transformation of a more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable agri-food systems for better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life, leaving no one behind. Child labor is across all these sectors. But again, touching those four betters is the way which, in a sustainable way, we can move and reduce the levels of child labor. We have an important landmark awaiting us. Next year is the 5th Global Conference on Child Labor organized by ILO and hosted by the government of South Africa. We hope this event is just another step towards the future without child labor, including in agriculture. Let's work together to try to resolve this problem, and let's take it seriously. We need to act, and we need to change the way we operate today to be able to achieve the goal of reducing child labor, which is something not acceptable at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Torero. Muchas gracias. Now we will transition to our first panel called See, Why Does Child Labor Persist in the 21st Century? Identifying and Overcoming Obstacles to Child Flourishing. We will begin by watching a video illustrating the experience of young women who have bravely faced the tragedy of child labor in Kenya.
I started my journey of child labor at 10 years old. I used to do utensils for food. I washed also clothes for food, and I used to sell fish for food also.
At the age of 7, we used to pick tea, pay for our school fees. My mother got a breast cancer. The same year, my father also got an accident.
My parents could not provide at all. When I was 15, that's when I started charging for braiding. When I was 16, I got pregnant.
I was employed as a housemaid. Then the man who didn't even want to pay me, he wanted to rape me. I met a man, I got pregnant, chased me away. I go to dig, get some money for me and my child. Parents and the society should be responsible for their children in order to eradicate this injustice called child labor.
Now, I would like to introduce Mr. Bernd Seifert, the FAO focal point for child labor, who will moderate this panel. Please, Mr. Seifert.
Thank you very much. Eminence, distinguished speakers, participants, as we have just heard, the first panel is all about seeing what the situation is. Why does child labor still persist in the 21st century? What are the obstacles and how can we overcome them to ensure that children are indeed flourishing instead of being trapped in situations of child labor? As we all know, child labor is a highly complex and challenging situation, and we indeed need to substantially increase action and work together to end child labor. We have 3 distinguished speakers in this first panel. First, we will hear from Michael de Kock, Head of Research and Evaluation Unit at the International Labour Organization, who will present the latest global child labor estimates. We will then hear from Cornelius Williams, Director for Child Protection at UNICEF, who will present recommendations on how to address child labor. And thirdly, we will hear from the field. Chetra Kyu, Operation Director of Damnok Tok in Cambodia, will talk to us from a local perspective and share with us some of the main obstacles that children face, and will also highlight a number of actions that can help address child labor. So before Michaela will start, Cornelius will have some introductory remarks to this joint presentation of the ILO and UNICEF. Over to you, Cornelius.
Thank you very much, actually. Colleagues, actually, I'm going to do a joint presentation with my colleagues, Michelle and ILO. The two UN agencies work very closely together. His Eminence mentioned 8.7, and the two agencies actually with FAO, we are committed to making sure that we achieve the target 8.7. My colleague actually would present a data. We need to know the status of child labor. We need to know where we are. We need to know how many children are still trapped in this unfortunate practice. So we published for the first time an ILO UNICEF report as co-custodian of the target 8.7 of the Sustainable Development Goal, and which we showed estimates and trends. And we also took stock of the way forward. Our presentation today would help us to understand where we are, what we need to do, and unfortunately, we also have the impact of COVID, right, which has set us back. So let me turn immediately to Michelle. Michelle, over to you. And I'll guide the PowerPoint, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you, Cornelius. Eminences, distinguished participants, it's a real honor to present the latest global estimate of child labor. In this framework, See, Judge, Act, I can assure you that we take our responsibility to provide figures for C, for understanding the problem very seriously. The teams in UNICEF and ILO involved in providing these figures are committed to provide reliable figures that the international community trusts and use to better target their action. The latest global estimate published this year relate to 2020, where we estimate still 160 million children engaged in child labor. I just recall that child labor is a subset of child work. Many more children work. Child labor is the share of child work, which is detrimental to children's health, education, psychological health, and childhood. A subset of them, 79 million, are performing hazardous work with a real threat on their health. Thank you. Next. It's the 6th global estimate produced by ILO, as the first one was in 2000. And we've seen a decrease, especially between 2000 and 2016. But unfortunately, for the first time this year, there was a stagnation in the prevalence. Almost 1 child out of 10 in the world is in child labor. No change between 2016 and 2020. And because there is a highest number of children, that was translated by an increase of the absolute number of children in child labor for the first time. Next slide. Those figures that I just presented are based on an extrapolation from more than 100 countries who collect data on a regular basis. But these data were collected before COVID. So we had to estimate the impact of COVID. And you won't be surprised to hear that it can be, and it is probably even worse than these 160 million children. Without mitigation measures, if countries go as it is now, we would have 9 million more children engaged in child labor by the end of next year. The positive side of this scenario is that if member states commit and engage for more social protection, we estimate that the number could decrease to 145 million. So there is no fatality. It's not that child labor will be here forever and ever. It's a matter of responsibilities from all of us. So if there is a commitment to social protection, again, instead of increasing because of COVID, we could, as international community, have the number decrease even rapidly in the next 2 years if social protection is increased. Next. The progress has not been the same all over the world. While the number of children in child labor decreased in Asia and Pacific and in Latin America, you can see in these two regions really a regular decrease. Unfortunately, that was not the case for sub-Saharan Africa, where the number increased between 2012 and 16 and again in the last 4 years. And as Kailas mentioned in his speech, it's now more than half of the children in the world in child labor are in sub-Saharan Africa. So there is a real need to target our efforts to this part of the world. Next, please. Very important is to better target our interventions to understand where the children are working. And in the world as a whole, more than 2 children out of 3 are working in agriculture among those who are in child labor, 70%. And as you see, this percentage is even higher for sub-Saharan Africa, where it is above 80%. That means 8 children out of 10 in child labor in Africa are working in agriculture, which can be farming, fishing, forestry, all these activities from agriculture sector. Next and last, please. That's a very important point because, our fight against child labor must be comprehensive. We talk a lot about global supply chain, those export crops, and it's extremely important to combat those forms of child labor. But it's also important to know that family work is the majority across all regions. It's between 70 and 80% of child labor takes place in the family context. It could be the family garden, the family farm, the family shop, the family workshop, where children help the parents, but in fact, this help is in most cases quite hazardous for the children. So family work is a place where we need to target our efforts. Next. I leave you, Cornelius, to move to the recommendations produced as a result of this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. On the basis of those analyses that we did, and then we looked at the trends and the programmatic interventions that have proven successful, and what I would call investment that actually investable interventions. We have 3 bundles of them. I'll start with this first bundle. One is to make social protection universal. As Kailas has said, and you would keep hearing about that, we need to make it universal, and we have seen the universal child benefit have proven to be beneficial for education and health, and also to increase birth registration so that you know who these children are and that these children become visible to the state. In addition to that, actually, you have to link that social protection to gender and also to child protection. And it has a transformative component if you link it to gender and child protection. It's critical, it can address gender-based violence, child labor, and discrimination. Then you have the Global Coalition for Social Protection Floor, which actually we have been advocating for, and it is a source of how to finance social protection, as Kailas has mentioned. The decent work and acceleration to formality, we've seen the Pope mention it, His Eminence has mentioned it. We cannot have an economy where we don't have decent work, right? And so the priority here is the labor and social security laws, right, across all industry, and to create a formal job market. The representative of women's, men and children's voices who are working in informal economy, we know a lot of them are in the informal economy, but we have to ensure that we hear the voice and support them to transit to formality and to get them to influence their productivity and income. Livelihood in the rural area. We really need to invest in livelihood. His Eminence spoke about the fishing in Ghana, which is well known. There is a cocoa industry, there is a tea industry, there is a lot of work in the rural area that we have to address. And it's not only in smallholders, it's also in the commercial entities. They need to make sure schools are there and daycares are there that parents could bring their children to. The collective voice of the workers, as we've said, is important. Employment-intensive schemes in the rural areas on infrastructure. Now that actually we have the fiscal space and we see governments putting a lot of money, right, to bounce back the economy, we have to ensure that some of these go into the rural area on water, power systems, farming productivity. This could affect children who are the ones that are hauling waters and gathering fuel. So it also links to the climate change and the green economy. The skills, it has been mentioned as well for rural youth. Then we have to ensure that we reduce the risk of child labor in domestic and global supply chain. There is a deep supply chain that sometimes we don't talk about, the supply chain in the cottage industry that then feeds the factories, right? We need to be able to examine this deeper supply chain and to address that supply chain as well. And business actually, as a bounce back, needs to take this into consideration. I don't know if you're aware of it, but there are countries that have started talking about changing their labor laws because of child labor laws, because of shortage in the labor market. So we have to look at actually in making, as I said, the business more responsible in terms of their purchase practice and how they're going to scale up, and ensure that actually we have industry-wide collaboration. For example, in the industry-wide collaboration, the Cocoa Foundation is looking at how to clean the cocoa supply chain. The Cobalt Foundation, the cobalt industry is looking about how to clean the cobalt industry. And the cloth manufacturers have been struggling with it for a long time. Okay, maybe they'll get it finally someday. In terms of actually the second bundle is the social norms and protection, which we need to look at, safeguarding and advancing children's education. You keep a child in school, it hits so many vulnerabilities and risks. And one of them is child labor, right? There is empirical evidence to prove that. So that's one of the things. Schools are reopening. Who are the children who are not getting back in school? We can't miss these children. They are the most vulnerable. And so the back to school campaign that we all keep hearing about has to make sure there are systems to get these children back to school. Early childhood, I've mentioned it, and pre-primary education. Twinning your minimum age for compulsory for work with the end of school compulsory age is a very good practice as well. Increasing investment in education systems to improve the quality. We have seen abolishing fees and associated costs. We had that girl in my country. Most of the children who are working on the street are not living on the street. They're generating money to pay the off cost in schooling that you don't see, the invisible cost, that broom that they have to take to school, the brick that they have to take to school, the teachers' gifts that they have to take to school. That's what keeps the children on the streets. They are not working just for livelihood or to save their parents. So these hidden fees and things, we have to make sure that we abolish it. And as I said before, the last one, register every child, okay, sorry. Register every child so that they are not invisible. Child protection systems, we have to have a system that responds to these children. And every society has its system of child protection. So we're not saying take a formal Western system and implement it in this country. Identify the system and strengthen that system that we're talking about, and the workforce in that system, the social service workforce and the power workforce. The gender discrimination and norm, this is where faith-based organization makes a tremendous difference. You are an influential voice in ending these gender norms and discrimination, the laws, the enforcement mechanism that is lacking. You are a voice, actually, that you bring these values that people listen to, right, in ending this discrimination and cultural norms. Let me move on, actually, to my last bundle. My last bundle is the evidence, policy, and international cooperation. We have to have adequate legal frameworks that promote compliance. You all know, actually, we were part of this generation that promoted the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's easy to get a government to have a policy. It's easy sometimes to pass the legislative framework. But if there is no budget line, if there is no institutional changes, it is just rhetoric, right? We need to support governments to move beyond the rhetoric and ensure that actually we can enforce this law. And by enforcing this law, we're talking about the labor laws, inspectorate. In India during COVID, one of the people who could not go out to enforce the law was the labor inspectorates. They didn't have the fuel, they didn't have the PPE to go out and enforce the law. And so what happened? The children, I've learned that in the States since I've been living there, were given the pink slip. And the pink slip means you have been dismissed. And the children were put out on the street, right? And they were even offered to be put in institutions. And in the institutions, they were offered to be given a little money to go home. We have to ensure that the laws are applied and the labor inspectorate system is working. Last point, actually, we have to avoid a situation where the minimum age of work is below the age of completing your education. We have seen, actually, I was in Sicily and I saw a child who came from northern Ivory Coast. It's because of the clampdown on child labor. In Ivory Coast, in the cocoa farm, they have found another way to move out. The trade unions, we have to work with them. And the last point. I'm not going to talk about the conflict and disaster because then I'll go on and on about that. So let me don't talk about that. Okay, that's the child soldier issue. The last point is investing in the statistics and the data. We have to invest in the statistics and the data. We have to hold this information in the face of the world to show them that in 2021, 2022, 2023, 25, that children are still working and that the clothes you and I wear comes from child labor and that the battery that would be in the electric cars come from child labor and the chocolate comes from child labor. So we have to have those statistics. Back to you, Benny.
Thank you very much, Cornelius. Thank you very much, Cornelius, and also Michaela. You gave us a very good overview of the overall estimates in a short time with a lot of information, which is well taken. I note the majority of child labor is indeed in Africa, and you presented a very rich catalog of recommendations that ILO and UNICEF is proposing based on a lot of experience, and that was very insightful. So now let's move to the next speaker. Let's hear from Cambodia, experience from the ground. So Chetra, over to you now. We like to hear practically in situations of child labor, and you have a lot of experience. How does this look like? What are really the concrete challenges that children are facing, and what have you really seen works to address this at the child level, at the family level? Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk from Cambodia. So I would like first to look at the root cause of the child labor in our context. So in Cambodia, it is not about cultural question when we talk about the child labor. It is about structural problem. So child labor is linked to many root factors, such as poverty background of the family, lack of education of the parents. So they don't see that it is education have a power that help them to get away from the problem, especially when they are living in the rural area. And education should be free for the children, but family have to pay an extra cost, and sometimes teachers are still asking for an extra pay from the children. In the family, is lack of child labor, lack of workforce. So children have to work sometimes instead of the adult, especially in the field. Loan sharks is a problem. Should parents need to pay back the loan with the horrific interest. Health, social issue of the family members, it lead to the problem that they need to address. Drug addiction of the parent and children, gambling issue, and of course, corruption. These issues are not only happen in Cambodia, but also it happened when people migrate to find a work in a neighbor country. In this context, I talk about Thailand. That are the neighbor country to Cambodia. So parents have to find the work in Thailand, and so they have to bring along the children. Human trafficking is also part of this root cause. So parents have to sell the children to allow the family survive. In 2020, it was found that 7.5% of Cambodian children aged from 5 to 14 years old are in the workforce. Do we see some progress? Yes. Seeing improving slowly. We see change on the ground that have been initiated, accompanied by ILO, UNICEF, and other international organizations. We see the change and impact on the grassroots level. In the past few years, we see the national government become more involved and things start to change. So law and policy have been established and implemented. For example, the government have set up a policy and control in the fishery sector, in the garment factory, and other also in other sectors. So they do the inspection to make sure that there's no children work inside. Collaboration between the authorities, so to end the organized begging game. So in some children that on the street are controlled by a gang, they exploit them every day. And today, if we are witness of the child labor and child abuse, we are sure that we can bring and report to the government, and then they take action. But unfortunately, the child labor, even that we have the improvement, the child labor still exists. This improvement we can see in the, like, people have a higher income, children going to school, law and enforcement of policy in place, but the child labor is still there. The US Department of Labor stated there's been a failure to take active measure to investigate, to prosecute and sentence a public social who participate in facilitate the worst form of child labor. And corruption, of course, is a big issue when it comes to the law enforcement. And child labor in Cambodia is still a complex issue. We see it mainly still happen in the following sectors: brick factory, construction, agriculture, street children, begging, prostitution, scavenging, selling objects, selling fruit, vegetable, etc. Over the 23 years, the organization have been working in child protection to prevent the child trafficking and child exploitation. We work toward a country where the children are able to flourish in their own family environment. Our projects are based on the prevention, protection, and reintegration. We offer the employment opportunity, education to children, alternative care option, skillful parenting, healthcare, psychosocial support, so that we can mitigate the risk of child labor. We have a social worker that are working 7 days a week in order to identify and work with the child worker, the street-involved children, and youth who are faced the substance abuse. We have an office at the border with the Thailand. So we identify the unaccompanied children that was deported from Thailand and provide immediate support services. The mother also work directly with the family in order to prevent the family separation, forced labor of children before it happens. What we need to do more, from our perspective, we need a good collaboration of the relevant stakeholder, but with also the good coordination. Government, international organization, international NGO, grassroots organization have to work together in order to address the gap within the system. Grassroots organizations have to be part of this collaboration and coordination because we are the witness of what needs to improve and what needs to change in the field. So we see on the ground how things change when all the actors work together. And thank you very much to include us in this panel. It is really important that the information from the grassroots organization like ours are taken into consideration at the national level. And thank you to the moderator and speaker on this panel for the work you have done to help our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chetra. I think you can hear from the applause that you get that this was indeed a very rich and informative contribution that you have made, explaining from very many angles what the challenges are and also where you really see what can work, but what has to be also strengthened, like you mentioned last, the importance of a very strong coordination between, not only between different government sectors, but also with the civil society, with the private sector. And I think that that is indeed what we are all calling for, and we all know this more has to be happening in this context. And also your reference to having good policies to some extent in place already, but then not being implemented is also something that Cornelius was mentioning before. And I think we can also confirm that from the FAO side, we've worked actually on fisheries laws in Cambodia and integrated child labor considerations, and there are specific, there's, for example, a child policy of the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries in Phnom Penh, and it's very well designed, addressing child labor, child nutrition, looking into supporting younger youth. But in terms of implementation, also there we are at an early stage, and that's where we have to certainly strengthen more our work in general. I see there is a message that was provided by the chat, and maybe we should have a look at this. It refers to the industry's accountability to be free of any child labor or slavery in their supply chains. and the question of whether it's important to strengthen systems or creating systems. Is this already in places being asked? In which regions is the prevalence of child labor? And I think it means child labor in supply chains in particular high. So has UNICEF a champion of this? And also is the ILO including this in their strategies is being asked. So maybe should I first ask the ILO? Michaela, do you want to take this question?
Okay, I will. That's a very good question, and thank you. I will take this question from my perspective, which is on data, because we talk a lot about child labor in global supply chain, but up to now there are very few data on that topic. So 2 years ago, we released a report with IOM, OECD, UNICEF, and ILO to try to, again, do a global estimate of child labor in global supply chain. And right now, we are piloting methodology to answer exactly to that question on specific supply chain, electronics in country X or Y, where we go from the mining to the factory of mobile phone. So we go through a full supply chain, not only in one industry, it's really all over the supply chain. This is extremely important to make sure that the resources and that the, let's say, responsibilities of companies, of businesses along the supply chain are highlighted through research. So that's from the data point of view. Cornelius, do you want to answer on the policy side?
Yes, Michelle. On the policy side, actually, is action being taken. The primary responsibility and the duty bearer for making sure that supply chains do not involve children is the government or the authority in that territory. We in the international community can support the government, can bring best practice, can help them in the legislative framework, but they have the primary responsibility. I spoke about two of the supply chain, the cocoa supply chain, where there is a lot of work with the Cocoa Foundation to make sure that the supply chain is free of children. So there is a joint action with the government and the Cocoa Foundation on ILO and UNICEF in both Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana to ensure that they try to eradicate children in the supply chain, from the farm throughout the supply chain. On the cobalts, there's action being taken, but at this point, you know that there's DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo is fragile. There's some work being done, but it's not as strong, and so more needs to be done. And the clothing supply chain is more mature. There's been some work on it, but as told you, we've now learned a lesson. There are deeper supply chain, okay, of those who supply the buttons or stitched parts, etc. So it's becoming more and more complex as we learn about it.
Thank you very much. Before moving to the next panel, I just wanted to also observe from the FAO perspective, we also recognize certainly the importance of bringing these due diligence measures and related measures much more forward in agricultural global supply chains. And I think much more work has to be done. At the same time, we also advocate to not forget the domestic supply chains, because there are less informed consumers. And if you look at the whole quantity of produce being produced and sold under child labor, it's more in domestic supply chains, and there's far less attention. And I think we also have to find ways in moving to addressing this in domestic supply chains. Thank you for this very good panel. I enjoyed this dialogue very much, and very rich, and certainly also rich because we have very concrete experiences from Cambodia that we could listen to. And yes, over to the next panel. I'm not sure who's moderating next. It is Alessandra.
Thank you very much to all the participants. We are moving now to the second panel. Judge, how does child labor impact children's dignity? A focus on health and education. We're starting by hearing from the lived experience of a child laborer.
I was raised up by my brother. There was the shift from my brother to my parents. Since my parents are not that supportive, I started working when I was at 7 to 8 throughout my primary school until now in high school, just working for my shopping, my fare to school, been fetching water for people. I've worked in the slaughterhouse and other pottery works. Through those hustling, I've been supportive to my family. They are not able to feed themselves. Being the main support in the family, it's been a hard job for me. I'm hoping that through these struggles, I come up being a role model in the society. Other children facing this child labor never give up in life, because God is there and is there to provide.
I give the floor now to the moderator of this second panel, Sir Alessandra Smerilli, Interim Secretary of this Dicastery. Please, Sir Alessandra.
Thank you, Marta, and thank you all of you. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It depends of the latitude you are. And first of all, I'd like to say a word of thanks for this nice video we are watching. They are made by young people, young students in Kenya, and we are very happy for this collaboration with them. And so we are now entering in this second phase of this seminar conference meeting. It is the judge part. And the title is, How Does Child Labor Impact Children's Dignity? A focus on health and education. And so during this panel, we will go deeper into the reality of child laborers and consider how missed outcomes and lost opportunities affect the well-being of children and their communities and their families, how this impairs their future. Of course, we can't cover everything in 30 minutes, but with this meeting, we are starting a journey of collaboration, at least among people gathered here, because I think we are here not to sit and to speak about topics, but to do something. And so in this panel, we try to address some issues and causes and consequences of child labor. And we are conscious, as Michelle was saying before, that the future depends on us, on our action. And when Pope Francis established the Vatican COVID Commission, he said, please prepare the future, which is different for being prepared for something. And so we are here for this. And we will be accompanied in this part of the journey by some distinguished speakers. The first one is Dr. Massimo Torero. We already had the introductory video from him, but now he's releasing a 5-minute speech about this topic. He's, as we learned before, the chief economist at FAO, and he will deliver us some speech and thoughts on this topic. Then I'm very pleased to moderate this session in which Nasrin Sheikh is going to share her experience. Nasrin is an international speaker and advocate for global human rights. Her story about how she escaped child labor and modern day slavery has been published in Forbes, Amnesty International, Cosmopolitan magazines. And at around the age of 16, Nasrin founded Local Women's Handicrafts, a successful social enterprise empowering underserved women. She now leads a grassroots charity called Empowerment Collectives, with the goal of ending modern day slavery by advocating 7 keys for global human rights. And then we will share this session with Philip Goldman, the founder and president of Maestral International, a team leading of global experts supporting the development, strengthening, and coordination of child welfare systems that meet the needs of children in adversity. Philip is an expert, but is also a very good friend of us, the friend of the commission, the Dicastery. We are working very well together. But before giving the floor to all of you, I'd like to introduce Maurizio Martinez, special advisor to the Director General at FAO. He was supposed to give some concluding remarks, but because of a flight, he has to leave early. And so is addressing his speech now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alessandra. I'm sorry for this exchange, but the plane is playing. And for me, it's an honor, this meeting, and thank you for the invitation. I wish to thank the OLC and the Dicastery of Promoting Integral Humanity Development for organizing today's discussion. Very, very, very interesting. As we have heard, FAO, with Bernd said, Massimo said, is engaged to develop in its strategy efficient tools, concrete tools to address child labor. In 2021, in particular, in this international year of the elimination of child labor, and represent a unique opportunity for increasing collective efforts. We need to tackle the causes that force children into exploitative and dangerous working activities, and in all sectors, especially in agriculture and fishing. The main dramatic cause of child labor is poverty, and vulnerable and fragile conditions of families with low incomes and no social protection. Poverty and inequality have a direct correlation with child labor. And we have seen this correlation very dramatically with the pandemic, the impact of COVID-19 in the economy and all the incomes of families together with the school closures have pushed many of the poorest families to engage children in child labor. We need public policy, especially in vulnerable countries, to support social protection, in particular towards children and women. And I would like to highlight the strong relation between child labor and the condition of women. Because child labor occurs where women are exploited. We cannot separate, in my opinion, these two aspects. And the other big aspect I wanted to highlight is the responsibility of companies, also in relation with big company and medium company and small family company, family farmers, and the private sector to create decent jobs and decent employment conditions. And this is crucial in large multinationals and in a small-scale production, including the local and regional value chains. Too often, price competition between companies leads to a compression of rights and salaries. Unfair practices and the race to the lowest price will impact the most vulnerable, mainly children. And we know that this is a global problem since child laborers are employed in sectors that export their production worldwide. This means that child labor and the poverty trap originate in developing countries are commercially sustained by consumers in other parts of the world. And therefore, we need the strong social causes to guide international trade, especially when we look at the agri-food systems. We cannot accept a competition with no rules infringing fundamental rights only to increase profits. And everyone should take on more responsibility to fight this scourge. And governments must put in place and ensure that legal frameworks protect child rights, ensure social protections, meet and regulate the labor sector. International organizations should continue to supporting the developing of national child labor sensitive policies and strategies for inclusive development. Civil society must continue raising awareness at all levels, in particular with consumers, to contribute to global action through informed choices. And the business sector must be open and transparent in working with the international community to help eliminate child labor. And finally, for me, it's important that also the follow-up actions of the Food Systems Summit held by United Nations with FAO, with other agencies of the United Nations system, this early year contribute to address child labor. Is a topic, is an emergency, is not a second topic respect the future of the food systems in all the world. And let's reaffirm that we all have a responsibility in protecting our children's rights. Let's all double our efforts to eradicate child labor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maurizio, and I think we'll continue to work together on these very important topics. And now we will listen to the pre-recorded remarks from Maximo Torero.
My name is Maximo Torero. I am the Chief Economist of FAO, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. Child labor, per definition, has a negative impact on the health and on the education of these children, and this is particularly true in the case of child labor in agriculture. Overlooking solutions to eliminate child labor represents an opportunity because we cannot afford. We often explain that one of the main determinants of child labor is household poverty, but poverty is also the result of child labor. This is a vicious circle where children in child labor do not get the opportunities to acquire fundamental skills and to grow strong and healthy, which is indispensable for the future of the rural communities they belong to. If kids don't have education, they won't be able to do something different, and they won't be able to move away from child labor. Those who produce our foods have been hit hard by the COVID-19 crisis, face deteriorated socioeconomic conditions, and may resort to child labor to secure their basic production and meet their minimum needs. So how we can break this cycle? We want these kids to go back to schools, which have been closed because of the lockdown. For this, we need a coherent policy approach on child labor elimination, safe and sound agricultural practices, and relevant education and skill development for decent youth employment in the agri-food systems. Much of the work in the sector is hazardous. Children in child labor in agriculture face some of the most dangerous and damaging threats to their health and well-being. These include, for example, operating heavy machinery, spraying toxic pesticides, carrying heavy loads, climbing high trees, or working on small boats out on the sea at night. This kind of work is exhausting, not adapted to their developing bodies and minds, and fatigue prevents them from benefiting from schooling when they have not dropped out of it early. It puts their health at immediate risk and endangers their lives and development. This reality goes against the perception in many communities that children working alongside adults always represent an essential and a safe element of their socialization, replacing or complementing formal education. We have to make sure that education and training for agri-food systems are relevant and accessible, and that they promote safer agricultural practices, a culture of work based on human, animal, and environmental health. Agricultural programs should help to reduce family dependency on child labor by reducing the work burden. For example, by facilitating adoption of simple technologies or changes in practices that decrease the burden of women that is often linked with the demand of child labor, like a mechanical weeder. It's important to understand that these households have to resolve a problem of poverty, have to resolve a problem of feeding their families, and that's why they work with their children. So we need to help them to find the innovation solutions through better technologies so that they can do what they need to do without the need of child labor. Mechanization, automation, and digital technologies are expected to affect deeply the world of work and agriculture in the near future. They hold promises and challenges. They can create new attractive employment opportunities by young people and adults in rural areas and help countries to add value to their products. But we need to be careful. As I said, they will promote challenges too. And it could be that they could also attract a bigger level of child labor. So we need to fine-tune the use of these technologies so that we minimize this risk and at the same time increase the efficiency of production of these farmers, normally smallholder farmers, on subsistence conditions, so that they can increase their productivity, they can increase their efficiency without the need of child labor. Shift to safer agricultural practices can reduce hazardous work for children and turn it into youth employment. For example, by no longer using hazardous pesticides, you can help to remove principal households out of the farm. And again, we need to be sure to show that the substitutes that we are using in terms of pesticides will also allow farmers to keep the levels of productivity they have and will allow them to produce their products without having problems of pests and diseases. So we need to find efficient solutions that give the return farmers need, but at the same time minimize the hazardous risk that this child labor is facing. Climate change is threatening the productivity of smallholders. Lack of productivity means food insecurity and the application of negative coping mechanisms such as child labor. One typical example of child labor in rural areas is very young children fetching water. Water scarcity means that children walk longer distances and have to take more risk to collect water. In many countries today, children have to walk 5 to 6 hours to arrive to schools. And if we add to that they have to go and fetch water because of the lack of water, we are basically coping their full day, and that won't allow them to go to school. So again, we need to find ways in which water, which will be a major constraint in the future, can be used in a more efficient way so that we can minimize those potential risks. We can improve and promote sustainable farming practices that will remove the use of chemicals, preserve soils and environment, and be much less harmful to children and their families, which will improve environmental sustainability of value chains, the habitat in which they operate, to help coping with climate change and addressing child labor. And which will immediately start preparing and equipping young women and young men with knowledge and capacity to adapt these threats, to apply climate-smart techniques, and to offer services to help farmers access the right information to anticipate shocks. We firmly believe that addressing child labor is a prerequisite for sustainable agri-food systems. We have the responsibility to do more and do it faster so that the children who are now left behind will get the chance to be educated, healthy, and skilled producers or workers in the future, whose family will free from hunger. But to do that, we need to be holistic. We need to look at the problem of the farmers, resolve the problem of the farmers, and find also at the same time solutions to minimize the risks of children working in agriculture. But we need to stop and we need to minimize the child labor today, if possible, move it to zero so that we can achieve the goal of having our children educated and having a better future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Massimo Torero was saying that poverty and child labor are reinforcing each other and creating a vicious circle. But here we have Nasrin, who tried to break this vicious circle, and we are eager to listen to you.
Thank you. I had so many notes, and as Father said that speak from the heart, I let it go of the notes, and I'm going to speak from my heart. It is an absolute miracle that I'm here with all of you in Vatican City, in the Holy Father San Francisco and Father here, and speaking about my journey. It's complete miracle that I'm alive today here. And I want all of you to please give me your attention and please hear my story. Because this is not the story of just Nasrin. It is the story of over 40.3 million people who still remain in modern day slavery. And as according to the data that we're talking about, that 160 million children are still in that situation. And I was one of the survivor. And I want you to look how much as a child labor we have to go through in life. I had to spend 25 years of my dedication, hard work, and non-stop sacrifice to be able to come here and be with all of you. So I do deserve to have 5 minutes with all of you. Thank you. I come from a small undocumented village. It is a rural village in the India border with Nepal. My village is very, very male-dominated society. We have no electricity or cars or hospitals. A place where children are born onto the floor of their family homes and neither birth or death records are kept. That is where I was born, and I started my journey as an undocumented person. I don't know how old I am. And I want you to imagine, what would you have a problem when you don't have birth certificate? Can you go to school? Can you apply for a bank loan? Can you apply for a business? Can you ever imagine to be an entrepreneur or a scientist? All of those dreams were taken away from me. But I do believe that God exists, and God exists even in the hardest part of life. God is everywhere. And that is in my village when I saw that every single young girls were being forced into marriage. When it happened to my own 12-year-old sister, she was 12 and she was being forced into marriage. And my mother told me, like, this is our culture, this is what we do. I did it, my mother did it, now your sister is going through and it will be your turn. When she said that it's my turn, it really hit me. I didn't want it to be a part of that situation, so I decided, what can I do? And prayer is a very powerful form of finding the peace within yourself. And I was able to find courage and inspiration with the help of nature and the prayer. And that led me to gave me a courage to get out of the village. But people like us who are undocumented and who come from those situations, who have no role model to look up to. My father was taken away from the iron industry, and he was, before I was even born, he was disabled. My mother is uneducated. Women have never had education. So my mother was taken away from me. So as a child, when you don't have father and when you don't have mother, you become very, very vulnerable because you need someone to guide you. In my case, and millions of 160 million child labor, they don't have that support. That is why they end up in those situations. So same like I also ended up in Kathmandu, in the capital city of Kathmandu, at the age of 9 or 10, I was working in 10 by 10 room, locked room for almost 2 years, working 12 to 15 hours a day to make and stitch same clothes over and over and over. And I will pause here and I will ask all of you here to raise your hand and tell me, do you know where your clothes come from? I know where my clothes come from. This clothes, my women made it. And when we don't know, where our clothes come from, or where our coffees come from, or where our chocolates come from, or where our bread comes from. We are, as a human, consuming human suffering. We are eating bloods, and we are eating tears, and we are consuming someone else's suffering. And we need to become aware of that. If we think that we are scientists and we are data analysis and we are founders and all that, it does not make, in the end of the day, any sense when we don't even know where our clothes come from, where our bread comes from, you know? So I was in this sweatshop for 2 years. I become a street kid, and no organization, no people come to help me. The help came to me in the form of dog. People will laugh, you know, but I feel like animals do see the spirit. Again, you know, the form of energy that comes through the animal is very, very pure. That dog was able to see me, and behind the dog is a gentleman. He became my teacher and my father. And with the help of education, I was able to seize my own destiny. Now I run a small organization, Empowerment Collective and Local Women's Handicrafts. My dream is to end modern day slavery from the bottom, go to the root. And in the root, in our communities, people need to be documented. People need clean water. People need nutritious food. People need health, education, and access to technology. We do need basic resources so we can become a human, you know. Right now, our children are machine, and we need to feel that. We need to understand that someday you were also a children. Your children is going to give a children someday too. So in what type of system we are building that is broken? It's so broken that it's putting poor people into the most vulnerable situation. And it gives me such a courage that we are talking about it here. It's a very, very heavy topic. People kind of lose the concentration because it's very, very heavy. But I know that with the ashes, the God and divine energy do grow up and do comes up. And if we all can start asking questions where our clothes come from and where our things come from, and if you cannot make a big difference, at least ask questions, you know. My teacher was the only person that he's dedicated his 10 years of life to teach me every single day, 1 hour, you know. And with that education, if I can come this far and can empower thousands of women, we have empowered so far with our organization 5,070 women, and we have led almost 6,700 backpacks to the school children. Our city is one of the most polluted city in Nepal called Kathmandu. We have given thousands of reusable shopping bags. I believe that if you believe in something, if you believe that child labor can be eradicated, it will happen right away. But if we don't do our work, it will be perpetual suffering. And right now, we all can experience that. COVID was just a blink, you know, it was a blink of reminder for all of us that how connected we all are. By eliminating one, we eliminate all, you know. By letting one child have child labor being working in the sweatshop, we're letting all the child labor, we're stealing their childhood, you know. My childhood was just stolen, and I don't want any other children to be in those situations. And I will speak, and I have dedicated my whole life to be a part of this. And I salute all of you for being here and giving your time to talk about these topics. But I do know that our society is so disconnected, and it is so disconnected that we will not able to find those children easily. It needs dedication, it needs funding, it needs supports, and it needs a very grounded father and very holy father to pray and to bring these children into justice. I have only 5 minutes. I think I given that time, but we have some really beautiful video that we have created. And I want you to see the work that I have done and learn. And I think that if I can come this far, imagine with the help of phones and with the help of internet, what can you do, you know? Like go to the Google and learn about the supply chain. Right now, only 6% of the entire supply chain is being transparent. 96% of them are hidden. So How can we hold these businesses accountable, to show the transparency, to show who makes these things, So by that, I will stop and I will let you watch the video.
Is a fair trade, eco-conscious collective of women creating unique fashion and decor in Nepal. Jobs and communities are created for marginalized and disadvantaged women to gain independence. Our production facility teaches professional skills in fiber crafts, entrepreneurship, and sustainability. After completing the 4-year program, the women have an option to work at the center, receiving a fair salary, or open their own small businesses. Our comprehensive model supports the whole woman so she can feel safe, experience self-value, and heal from trauma. Our focus is on ethical fashion. We model sustainability by collaborating with local farmers and small businesses. The women design, sew, embroider, and weave, creating beautiful shawls, hemp backpacks, yoga mats, home decor, unique clothing, and jewelry. With the support of a dedicated and passionate team, we have established a safe community that's changed hundreds of lives. We are determined to continue building resilient and self-sustaining communities of smart, empowered women. The women at our centers are thriving, but sadly, there are still over 40 million people who remain in modern-day slavery. We are campaigning on behalf of them by advocating for the 7 keys to eradicate modern-day slavery. The door to human rights has been locked for too many years. Fair trade and eco-conscious businesses hold the keys which can unlock the door of freedom to millions of people so they can realize their full potential. With that vision, we invite good people, businesses, and media to work together. Through raising awareness and making fashion in an ethical way, our goal is to eradicate exploited labor, forced marriage, and extreme poverty. Let's build a society where every person is free to be a leader, change maker, and problem solver.
Thank you so much. That was a little video that shows little blinks of our work that I have been doing for this last almost 13 years. I started this business when I was only 13 or 14 years old, and it took me almost 12 years to build our first center. And I had a dream, I had a dream about making things what I have experienced exact opposite of the sweatshop. And in the sweatshop, my room was so teeny. It was 10 by 10 room. We were 6 people. We were eating, sleeping, working, living in the same room. The windows was always closed. The main door was always closed. And most of we were being given food only once a day. We were like people, the agent would bring thousands and thousands of materials to tell us to stitch same things over and over, where my body felt like I was not a human. I was like a machine making same thing over and over. Some of my uncles, they started to work when they were 8 and finished I want you to imagine if somebody works from the day 8, when the age of 8 and all the way to age of 25, what happens? They lose the control of their eyes and their bodies. And my uncle became blind. And once they become blind, they become dependent on the society. And the society was not strong enough to help him and support him. So he passed away. So most of the people in these underserved communities, if they don't have basic human rights, they work there, they die there, and they have no life, And as a saying in my village, that it takes 99 cycle of rebirth to be a human. And it's such a powerful form to be a human, to create, to make change. And I am a living example of that. If I can survive, if I can come from that community and create all those change, and you saw all those women, what how can we not end child labor? You know, how can in 2021 we have 160 million child labor all around the world? It is almost like feeling shame to humanity, right? Because we are not able to give a basic human rights to our children. It just, I feel like whatever the experience that we are experiencing, it's not is ruled by the God. It is blinded by fear, and it's powered by greed and controlled by competition. And we need to stop that. We need to become more aware and more transparent business. And we need to ask questions that who makes our clothes? Thank you.
Thank you, Nasrin. I think you are giving us hope, but at the same time, you are calling us for responsibility, and your strength can become our strength, I think. And now I give the floor to Philip. I know, Philip, now it's hard to add something, but...
Thank you for the empathy on that. Nasrin, you have our attention. We all heard you. I think many of us came prepared the way we do with a lot in our heads about child labor. A lot of facts, a lot of things we're seeing, a lot of things we're doing. You came with your head, but also with your heart and your experience. And as Sister said, you called us. And I think many of us have the power and the influence, sometimes the resources in this room, to move the needle on an issue so important, as Pope Francis said today, to the present and future of humanity. This is one story, Nasrin. 160 million children, and in the space of one short year, another 9 million children. 1 year after decades of reductions in child labor levels. We can't possibly grasp the magnitude of this story multiplied by that number in different ways, in different contexts, at different levels. Every situation will be different, but it's the future. This is important. This is the future of humanity. And thank you for the incredible strength and grace that you brought to the table. I've been at this for over 30 years, and I've heard a lot of youth, but you really moved me. I think you moved us and called us not to work individually. We got to work together on this. We got to work together. So what I was going to talk about actually draws on one thing you said. It was right at the beginning. And you said you lost your mother and your father, and what an impact that had on you. And it certainly had I think, a strong bearing, an important bearing on your story, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So I'm going to narrow in on something that's going to seem a little strange to you, because we've been talking about a lot of macro issues in child labor. The shocks of, I think in the last year, 150 million new child poor, and the lockdowns and all the different pieces that have been contributing to the reversals that we've seen in the last year and our concerns moving forward. But there's something that we've been working on with the research team that we think is really important for the future, that we're not seeing much of today, but we think we're going to see a lot of it tomorrow. And we'll see whether or not this is the case, because this pandemic can go anywhere. But let me share our research with you. Our research team was assembled by a colleague at the US Centers for Disease Control. It consisted of members of the World Health Organization, USAID, the World Bank, a number of prominent universities, and our organization. And what we focused on was this issue of the loss of care due to the people who are dying from COVID-19. The number of children already who have lost a mother, a father, a primary grandparent providing care in the home, or another grandparent living in the home providing care. And we wanted to know, because of the spread of this disease and all the death we've been hearing about, how many children are being left behind? So at the time of our publication of our research, and there are a lot of smart people working on this, way smarter than I am, we looked at the number of deaths through the end of April, and then the number of children who were orphaned or who lost a caregiver. And when we published in The Lancet in June, we thought the number was somewhere around 1.5 million children around the world, which is a pretty concerning number. But it's pretty small compared to 160 million children engaged in child labor, right? So that, by the way, was a highly conservative minimum estimate required by the journal. So we knew it's probably much higher, perhaps multiples higher than that, but about 1.5 million. I'd like you to look at this from a different perspective. First, since the publication in June, we received new data from countries like India, where the surges were so great, but other hotspots around the world, and got much better data on the level of mortality. And we upped our estimate from 1.5 million through the end of April to 2.7 million children. Still small relative to 160 million. Maybe not so small when you think about 9 million new children entering child labor, right? So we're getting a little bit closer. But between the end of April and today, that number of 2.7 million has jumped to 5.2 million children, minimum estimates. It could be multiples of that. We could be talking 10, 15, 20 million children who have lost a parent or a caregiver to COVID-19. That's a doubling in the rate of loss. In April, it was a child losing a caregiver every 12 seconds. Today, it's every 6 seconds. And by the way, there's a widget that Imperial College has put up. We're tracking the numbers by the week because we're so worried. In that widget, you can search by country and globally how the numbers look. Imperial College again. And you can also see the curves of orphanhood and caregiver loss going straight up. So, minimum estimate. The world needs to be on red alert about this. And I will tell you the number that keeps me up at night, because what do these numbers mean? What does 160 million mean? What do any of these numbers mean? Do you remember when we had an HIV orphan crisis, which we talked a lot about before the pandemic? I think globally about 140 million orphans prior to all of our attention being sucked into this. The first year of HIV, there were 900,000 children who were orphaned. We're already at 5.2 million from COVID. It took HIV 10 years to produce 10 million orphans. We're at 5.2 who've lost care. About 3.3 million of those have lost a parent to the disease. And this is across every region, and it's affecting low, middle, and high income countries. So the way I like to think of it, or not like to think of it, it's like we've just spotted on a scan, a malignant tumor that's small and fast growing. We're at the very beginning of the pandemic, but we've learned a lot of lessons from HIV crises that are out there. And this one worries those of us who have that experience with what happened before, that this trajectory is going to get very, very, very ugly and quickly. So what's the link to child labor? I had a list of reasons here, but you said it in your story, right? When you lose care, you lose all sorts of protection. You're much more likely to fall into poverty. You're less likely to attend school. All the drivers that we talk about for ending up in child poverty are associated with the loss of a parent or caregiver.
We have no hope.
You have no hope. And in your case, you relied so much on your teacher, and ultimately on your community. And there's research I was going to go through, but I see my time is ending, but there's plenty of academic evidence that shows a direct association between orphanhood and child labor. So we have the story and we have the evidence and we have the increase. And so what I wanted to bring to you today, because I knew we were going to talk a lot about the big picture, is a new vector, a new and very worrying vector that's going to complicate our ability to address the child labor trends that we're seeing today. I'd like to say, we hope that with social protection, we can bring this number down, as was shown in the earlier graph. That should be a driver. But I'm afraid it's going to take more than that. Our research team has come up with a number of recommendations. The ones we'd like to spotlight before I end are these. We absolutely agree with the recommendations we've heard today on increasing social protection cash transfers for households. That is number one. But it needs to be combined with what we call cash plus care interventions. We need wraparound services, and we define these, that will provide parenting support, psychosocial support, and in fact, supports that will hopefully keep these children in families, because we don't want them to end up not just in child labor, but on the street or in an orphanage or a children's home. We need a family for them. They need kin to care for them if they don't have a parent. Other than that, foster care, adoption, all efforts need to be at the community level to try to ensure these children remain in that family setting and not out of it. That's where they'll thrive. That's where they're more likely to be protected. That is where they're more likely to be, or less likely to be falling into child labor. And finally, I just want to comment on some of the numbers. 9 million over 160 million means an increase of about 5.6%. We're doing a project in one of the cocoa regions, and in that country, our preliminary reports are that the increases in child labor are 21.5% in 1 year. 21.5%, much higher than the global average, but we need to be sensitized, I think, to the data. It's not necessarily playing out evenly. The number could be a lot higher than globally, in some regions at least, than we're seeing there. So I want to thank you for your attention. I want to thank you, though, most of all, for your story.
Thank you, Philip. And we are going to publish a short document with the help of Philip's on COVID and children, the impact of COVID. And so we'll see it later on. But I think we are running late. And so I give back the floor to Marta.
Thank you very much, sister. Thank you, all of you. We are moving to the third panel of this session called ACT, Facilitating Conversations and Advocating for Global Cooperation, the Church in Dialogue, by hearing from those who are working to eradicate child labor. Let's listen first to a video.
Child flourishing looks like healthy, free, safe, clean, educated, happy and playing child.
Where every child is treated equally in this world, like you and me.
They do have the same value as adult. Children should not be treated unfairly just because they are children.
We achieve this by positive parenting formation.
I think education is the only way to end child labor.
There is a child labor because parents cannot afford education for their child.
Create a compassionate world where every child has a free to live his freedom, free to live his childhood, and free to achieve his dreams.
To help these children, we have to open the centers for them.
Advocate for responsible mining.
So the main role of church is to provide education to them so they can learn some skill and so on.
And promote family life.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to Monsignor Segundo Tejado, who is moderating this panel.
Thank you very much, Marta. Thank you very much, all the
people that spoke. Now we go quickly because we are late. And the first, there are two people in this first part of the panel. The first one is building local and international alliances. Gianni Rosas, director of EALO, Office for Italy and San Marino, and Ana Lopez Castelló, chef, the technical advisor at Child Labour. You have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. While we position the PowerPoint, I would like to express our sincere thanks to the Dicastery for the invitation to this discussion on an issue that unfortunately continues to persist, which is the exploitation of children through work. So with this short presentation, also in the interest of time, as we are running late, together with my colleague, Ana Lopez, we will give some highlights of the importance of cooperation and partnerships. As it has already been said by colleagues who preceded with previous intervention, it's important that we act, but we act together. And what, in fact, we can do, just a second. Voilà. I mean, partnership and cooperation, working together is certainly has a value or as an end result, which is much higher than what single actors can do alone. And I think this is clearly stated also in the commitments that heads of governments and states have made while endorsing the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, and also recently confirmed by the universal ratification of the ILO Convention on the Worst Forms of Child Labor. And in this slide, you will see a bit, a grouping of partnerships at all levels that involves several topics. And on this, I would like to spend a quick word to say that also partnership for advocacy are very important. With our words, we can change things, not only with our words and action. And I'm really honored to also to have listened today to the words of Pope Francis, which also on the issue of elimination of child labor is a great global advocate. So this is something that it's particularly important also, in bringing together faith-based organizations as part of the civil society, both at global, national, but local levels to put an end to child labor. And as part of the commitments in the Sustainable Development Agenda, in fact, countries have decided to put an end to child labor by 2025. And this is, of course, requires, as I said, a commitment and action by several stakeholders. Let's just think what has to be done at national level. We mentioned, and Cornelius beforehand, and my colleagues from Geneva highlighted so many areas of policy action that somehow also within a government, they belong to different departments, units, and entities. And for policy coherence and for policy impact, it is necessary that the policies, they work together. So there is a scope for joining action to deliver and to have impact on child labor. And at global level, the partnerships and the regional level allow for the mobilization of support across countries, but also allow to deal with the mobilization of expertise, and also to discuss, as Nasrin was highlighting, also issues that they go across border. And we are thinking there about, global supply chains, or the products that also in our countries we buy, but we don't know who produced them and under which conditions. So this is certainly a commitment that, as I'll show then later on, a global partnership, which is Alliance 8.7, is committed to work together to achieve results on child labor and on the promotion of decent work for young people and for adults. Because I would like to state this as a very important aspect to to end child labor, because we mentioned that child labor is intimately related to poverty. So a way to bring young children back to school is to give better opportunities of employment to young people and to their families. And let's not forget that we have 160 million children who work, and at the same time, we have more than 200 million of adults who do not find work. So let me move to the Alliance 8.7, which is a global partnership that has been established across a variety of partners in order to take immediate and effective action to eradicate child labor and other forms of unacceptable work. So modern slavery, forced labor, and human trafficking, with a view to accelerating the achievement of target 8.7 of the 2030 agenda. This alliance works on two levels. One level is a group of countries who have decided to step up action and to move faster towards the achievement of the target 8.7 through a collaborative endeavors that include, as it was mentioned before, the enactment of new or improved legislation, and also strengthening enforcement measures, and also to take concrete action in terms of developing national action plans and policies with budgets attached to it, with a view to achieve target 8.7, and as well as they commit to ratify relevant human rights and international labor standards. In parallel, there is a very wide group of partners that include other governments, international and regional organizations, workers and business organizations, but also faith-based organizations who work together to advocate and to find solutions to eliminate child labor. On this, I will skip the other slide to give time to Anna for her presentation, but I would like to call those of you who are, or the organizations you represent, who are not members of the Alliance 8.7, to join in and to contribute with your expertise, with your ideas and with your action. And you will see Anna in the last slide will show also the web link to the page. So I did as fast as I could. Thank you. Muchísimas gracias. Anna.
Thank you, Yanni. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Yanni, for the presentation before, and thank you for the invitation. As agreed with Yanni, I have prepared my presentation in Spanish, so I switched to Spanish right now to go quickly. So, exacto. Bueno, en el marco de esas alianzas que acoge la OIT, se cuenta desde 2014 con la Iniciativa Regional América Latina y el Caribe Libre de Trabajo Infantil. La iniciativa regional nace antes de la aprobación de la Agenda 2030 y en ese momento se alinea con la meta 8.7 de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible en lo relativo a poner fin al trabajo infantil. La iniciativa cuenta con, como ven ahí, la diapositiva, digamos, muestra un poco la estructura de la iniciativa, cuenta con 30 países miembros, que son casi todos los países de la región, y también cuenta con organizaciones de empleadores y de trabajadores. Tiene como autoridad de alto nivel, por supuesto, a los ministros y ministras de trabajo de los países miembros, que suelen sesionar en torno a la reunión regional americana de la OIT. La iniciativa cuenta también con una red técnica de 45 puntos focales. Uno de ellos tenemos el placer de contar con ella, ¿no? en el panel de hoy, que es Carla Caballeros. Esta red de puntos focales sesiona mensualmente de manera virtual y complementariamente la Oficina Regional de la OIT tiene el rol de Secretaría Técnica. Bueno, esta iniciativa mantiene además una colaboración estrecha con la Alianza 8.7, acompañando acciones de los países pioneros de la Alianza en la región, pero además ha desarrollado acciones de colaboración con organismos de Naciones Unidas como la CEPAL, la Comisión Económica para América Latina y el Caribe de Naciones Unidas, la Organización Interna de las Migraciones, UNICEF, FAO y otras entidades regionales como la OEA. Y además cuenta con socios financiadores como España, Estados Unidos y Brasil. El trabajo de esta red regional ha logrado como resultado principal que el objetivo de erradicación de trabajo infantil sea prioritario en los países y los interlocutores sociales en la región, y esto de hecho se refleja en una reducción sostenida del trabajo infantil hasta 2020 de aproximadamente un 4% interanual, como también ha señalado mi colega Michael de Kock en la presentación. Lamentablemente sabemos que la pandemia está teniendo un efecto muy negativo en la región en este ámbito y la iniciativa está reforzando sus acciones para hacer frente al impacto en el trabajo infantil y al menos recuperar, no perder los avances alcanzados y poder seguir acelerando ese proceso. Bueno, la red se basa sobre todo en la cooperación sur-sur, en el aprendizaje horizontal entre sus miembros, y eso ha demostrado que la región tiene una capacidad y un conocimiento para acelerar ese ritmo de reducción. Siguiente, Gianni, por favor. Bueno, uno de los objetivos de la iniciativa es lo que denominamos la territorialización de la meta 8.7 de la Agenda 2030, y para ello se ha creado en conjunto con la CEPAL un modelo de identificación del riesgo de trabajo infantil que se conoce como MIRTI en español, y que se ha convertido en una herramienta clave para diseñar políticas locales preventivas orientadas a que haya menos niños y niñas que entren al trabajo infantil, no solamente en el territorio, sino en determinados sectores productivos vulnerables, y esto basado en la oferta de servicios públicos. Este modelo se ha aplicado en 10 países en la región, y esto nos permite contar con una cartografía del riesgo de trabajo infantil en 12.464 municipios de la región, y eso permite a su vez poner en marcha esa potencialidad de políticas municipales. Hay municipios mexicanos como Tuxtla Gutiérrez o Tapachula, en Chiapas, o Villa Victoria en el Estado de México, o Cuetzalan en Puebla, por otro lado Puerto Ibáñez, por ejemplo, en Chile, San Pedro Zacatepeques en Guatemala o Limón en Costa Rica, que han encontrado en el modelo un instrumento muy útil que, en base a evidencia, les permite conocer las características del trabajo infantil específicas en su territorio, y eso, haciendo un mapeo, digamos, de todos los servicios y los actores involucrados, permite generar procesos que dinamizan a todos los sectores para orientar las políticas y lograr tener una acción más eficaz. Y ya la última, Gianni, por favor. Como digo, el objetivo es contar con una política de prevención de trabajo infantil en cada municipio. Se trata precisamente de encontrar a cada niño y a cada niña en situación vulnerable, no solamente teniendo en cuenta sus circunstancias, sino las de su familia y las de la comunidad, para poder abordarlas de la manera más amplia posible con la participación de todos los actores. El potencial de la herramienta es realmente amplio, se siguen sumando países al proceso, y de hecho incluso se ha hecho una transferencia de conocimiento a los ministerios de trabajo en Costa de Marfil y en Malawi, en África, y Malawi ya ha solicitado formalmente la asistencia de la OIT para la aplicación del modelo. Esto, digamos, de alguna forma muestra la adaptabilidad de esta metodología para poder trabajar en las comunidades, en los municipios, y abre nuevos espacios para abordar esta vulnerabilidad de derechos, siempre al menos desde la iniciativa, pensando en poder llegar a alcanzar una primera generación libre de trabajo infantil. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Ana López. Now we move from Latin America to Africa. The Democratic Republic of Congo, we have with us Sister Catherine Mutindi. The floor is yours.
There you go. It's okay.
Thank you. And thank you to the organizers of the event and for the invitation. I take you to DRC. And I want to start with a question that was begun by Nasrin. Do we know where the batteries of our gadgets come from? Yeah, so that's a question that we might need to ask ourselves as we go on. So the background of my organization is the Congregation of Our Lady of Charity of the Good Shepherd. Is an international organization that works to affirm dignity and reduce poverty, violence, and discrimination, and safeguard and enhance ecology. Bon Pasteur Kolwezi that I'm representing now in DRC is something that grew to become a global partnership addressing poverty and slavery in mining of cobalt. And we started there at the invitation of the local bishop. Not moving. It's
no, because
okay.
If you move it from there, she moves it from here, we get stuck.
You would read? Okay. Okay, thank you. So we started in 2013. That is just to give you a picture of what it is. It took us 10 months to talk with children, families, everybody in the communities, walk up and down. It was a very participatory planning process. And we came up with an initial strategic document. And in the next slide, we will see the results of the focused discussion that we had with 465 girls, women, children, men in those villages. And looking at the area of the violations of child rights, we see that 70% of children engaged in child labor, and this was causing trauma to them and long-term health issues. We had experience of 90% of illiteracy, and 50% of the children were orphaned and they were unattended. There is a lot of issues with the sexual and gender violence in the mines. And going to the area of poverty and hunger, we see 90% of the population lives on under $1 per day. And the children that we interviewed, 100% of the children could not recall when they had a real meal. Next. So that is the context. It is the global cobalt supply chain for battery. And you see there, it's a landscape of mining. At the other side that we cannot see, it's the industrial mining, and the heap is formed, and the community goes there to collect the stones. You see some river passing by there, that they will be picking the rocks and washing. The piece held there is a demonstration of what it is, and then it goes to the batteries. Sorry, thank you. Next. So the cobalt demand is, as we see there, between 2010 and 2016, tripled. And we are told that up to 2025, this is going to be doubling still. Now, the remote estimation of the cobalt in the world comes from Congo, and only from this province where we are. And that qualifies Kolwezi to be the global cobalt capital. 20% of this cobalt is sourced artisanally, as you see, and with children involved. Next, please. The impacts on human rights, lives and livelihoods, as we have seen in a summary, really, Kolwezi is poster child of the resource class. You go there and you just see barren landscapes and a lot of suffering. So there are all those issues there because of an absent governance, very poor political will to regulate the reality there. So we see all those things that are happening there. A picture there of, just to give you an image of what it is, the root causes of child labor, as has been shared by the other presenters. We have experienced poverty, lack of economic alternatives to mining, and lack of social protection and poor governance. Those are some pictures of the children in the labor. For us, really, this is a major risk. It's a major injustice. It's a major evil. Artisanal cobalt mining has turned children into digital slaves. They sacrifice dreams, future, life. They are feeding an e-mobility, an e-economy that they cannot relate to and they cannot relate with. It is called sustainable green energy revolution, and whatever we might want to call it. On the ground, things are very messy. For many, cobalt means food, and just food for that day. 2/3 of children do not go to school. So the big question for us on the ground is, how can a sustainable future really be built through sacrificing children, well-being, and their right to be children in the first place? Our response there, we keep on learning and we keep documenting what we are doing. So that is the theory of change that we are implementing now, and we have documented the program. We have looked at the root causes. They are many. And so for us, we realized that they need a multi-dimension approach to address. And for us, they have to be community-based, integrated, transformational, person-centered, and human rights-based. And the main call for us is to prevent, to protect, to remediate the child labor through strengthening communities, through creating sustainable alternative livelihoods and effective partnerships. We have some data to show that this really works. And some things did not work because children keep going back and forth from the school. This is a feedback from an evaluation that has been done on the program by Professor Mark Canavera, where the program is successful. It's because of radical inclusivity. We focus on the poorest first, integrating human rights and development, taking time to build human relations, focusing on both process and outcomes, that what we do and how we do it is equally important, and adapting strategic approach. In closing, this really, as the other speakers have said, it is a call for joint effort. No one of us can do it alone. We tried for a number of years, and actually the government was denying, and they told us there are no children in the mines. What we are seeing there are pygmies. These are not children. And and there is there are guidelines and principles on how to do responsible mining, but it's not working much on the ground. Good statements do not solve the issues. So the closing statement that we have there, for us, child labor concern is a survival question for all of us. Unless we join efforts to address child labor, to hold all stakeholders accountable for an e-mobility rooted in sustainable human and community development that protects all, including our common home, we are bound to perish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sister, for your contribution. Last, dulcis in fundo. El dulce al final se dice en italiano, en latín, verdaderamente. In the end of this panel, the third panel, we have Carla Caballeros, Executive Director of the Camera of Agro in Guatemala. Carla.
Okay, thank you very much. Last but not least, I hope, not only with the sugar. Well, first of all, I like to thank the invitation for the private sector. As I said to Pope Francis this morning during our meeting, the business side, the private sector are not the enemy. So we feel very welcome here with you today, because I think, and we believe, and we are very much committed to join efforts to end child labor, not only in our country, but to support child labor prevention in the world. I'm not gonna go through this much because it's already being stated through evidence and through the facts that has been presented and all of the statements. Child labor in the world and in Latin America and in many other regions is clearly and mainly a factor that it is related to informality, to poor, and that it is happening mainly in agriculture and agricultural family sector. As Chamber of Agriculture of Guatemala, we are committed to make sure that we were working inside the sectors, but also inside with our companies to make sure that child labor was not an issue, to make sure that labor policy compliance was enforced, but also to make sure that zero tolerance policies for child labor was also established. We started working under something that was already being built by our members and the companies of our members, not something that we came up with, and that made the path a lot easier, that the business themselves were already working on that. They were already committed. They had already established all of the compliance systems that a company need to have. Then we launched the policy for labor compliances, and we took a lot of other steps through the years that has provided us today to be part of the Alliance 8.7, also part of the regional initiative for Latin America and the Caribbean. And we have also been awarded by the International Employers Organization as the Changemaker Award Innovation Award for child labor prevention. We have been also, as a country, achieve and contribute to the reduction of child labor in Latin America, and we have been recognized by the U.S. Department of Labor as for 5 consequent years as significant advance in reducing child labor and actions for prevention child labor, and 1 year for moderate advance in child labor. There are more than 20 business associations that are part of the business network for prevention of child labor. There are 2 NGOs, 2 international organizations, also the ILO and FAO, which are today with us. And we're working together with the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Labor, since we are taking education as the main tool to prevent child labor. The success story that we can tell today from that results from the network is that we have been setting a strategy with a high level commitment and working in private-public areas. We have been outlining 3 strategic lines. One is compliance. The second one is to support the state policy for strengthening the national education policy. And 3 is to support the health policy of the government, including safety and security at work. And that, of course, I have to be very clear that we are talking about in 2 and 3, we're talking about supporting, because we are not the government. We cannot replace the role of the state. We can only support for the state to make a better job. And we can also do social monitoring from our side. And since this is a problem that it is outside the businesses, mainly, at least in the case of mainly the region of Latin America, and I think the facts established mainly in many other regions, we have to work with the government to support the conditions outside the businesses. I'm gonna show you a short video of the business network.
Los niños y las niñas a la escuela es la apuesta de los empresarios de Guatemala para prevenir de forma sostenible el trabajo infantil. Más de 950,000 niños, niñas y adolescentes trabajan en Guatemala, principalmente en el sector informal, rural y agrícola del país. Guatemala tiene grandes desafíos en el área rural. Las empresas guatemaltecas están comprometidas con la no contratación de mano de obra infantil en sus operaciones y como parte de la Agenda de Desarrollo Económico y Social, promueven la importancia de la creación de empleos formales. La Cámara del Agro, como miembro del CACIF, promovió en 2015 una alianza estratégica de acciones y programas con resultados positivos para la prevención del trabajo infantil. Más allá de visibilizar la política de cero tolerancia al trabajo infantil y la difusión de buenas prácticas, el corazón de la red empresarial es la alianza para apoyar el plan de trabajo de la organización Empresarios por la Educación, que tiene como meta de largo plazo promover la mejora de la cobertura y calidad educativa en Guatemala. La red empresarial está conformada por 18 cámaras empresariales, 4 organizaciones no gubernamentales, 2 entidades de gobierno y 2 organismos internacionales, quienes participan en las instancias de diálogo social a nivel departamental, nacional e internacional. Los niños y niñas a la escuela para un presente y futuro con crecimiento económico, empleos formales y mejor calidad de vida para todos.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to show you very quickly just 3 basic examples of members of good practices of members of our network. One is the National Coffee Producers Association. They have their social arm, which is FUNCAFE, Fundación para la Caficultura. They have programs in different areas, health, education, and food security. But they also have a very specific target in child labor prevention.
Con el propósito de contribuir a la prevención y erradicación del trabajo infantil en zonas cafetaleras de Guatemala, la Fundación de la Caficultura para el Desarrollo Rural, FUNCAFE, ha creado los programas Coffee Kindergarten y Coffee Camp. Ambos programas se implementan durante el periodo de cosecha de café. Durante los 35 días que dura el programa, los niños y las niñas participantes son reforzados en destrezas y habilidades como competencia lectora, competencia psicomotriz, arte, cultura y sana convivencia. Los niños y las niñas son atendidos por profesionales de la educación mientras sus padres realizan el corte de café. Los productores del mejor café del mundo son los protagonistas de estas iniciativas y demuestran el alto compromiso del sector caficultor de Guatemala con la niñez guatemalteca.
En esta época de cosecha, el poder tener el sistema de Coffee Kindergarten, que es como un curso de vacaciones para nosotros, en donde los niños pueden estar seguros, en un ambiente controlado, aprendiendo, desarrollándose, y estamos muy contentos con poder hacerlo y con el apoyo que recibimos constantemente de FUNCAFE y por tanto de ANACAFE.
Como productores de café nos sentimos muy contentos de recibir a los niños todos los años en nuestro centro educativo, en donde ellos se entretienen, hacen manualidades, se educan, juegan y pasan un rato muy contentos.
Okay, I'm gonna go through the next slide, just 2 more minutes, and just want to show you also the Guatemalan sugar industry, which has also the governance programs where they worked inside the mills to make sure and to monitor and evaluate that they all comply with their labor policy compliance politics, but they also work outside their mills with the communities in the local government projects, supporting the youth with a program that it is focused on to create the dreams and the vision plans for the youth between 15 to 30 years, where they want to be at the 30. And they have also important programs with supporting education, more than 11,000 teachers that have been trained and supported by Fundazúcar, and also in the health area with they're working with more than 600 health workers and also in food security, contributing to the families and to support more than 750,000 women that are going to be, or that are the mothers of those children, and they will be supporting them to make sure they have the food nutrition. This is just to show you a little bit what they are doing. And pretty much I am leaving you the presentation with all of the links for the videos and what we are doing, not only in Guatemala, but also with the regional initiative and with the International Employers Organization. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Carla. Thank you very much for this presentation. All the materials, the presentations, videos will be available. And also the concluding remarks from Monsignor Fernando Chica. He cannot join us right now. He lost the connection, but we are just summarizing his remarks, but all the speech, all the statement would be available immediately on the website. So Monsignor Segundo is going to read the statement remarks of Monsignor Fernando Chica, who is the permanent observer of the Holy See to the FAO. He is reading in Spanish, but just a brief summary of the remarks.
Fernando, ¿te vemos ahí? Ah, no, hoy. Lo habéis hecho desaparecer. Ok. Palabras conclusivas. Eminencia, distinguidos oradores y oradoras, queridos amigos y amigas que participáis en este seminario de estudio. Al clausurar este encuentro, deseo dar las gracias de corazón a todos los que han puesto lo mejor de sí mismos en su realización y fructífero desarrollo, en particular al Dicasterio para la promoción del desarrollo humano integral y a la Comisión Vaticana COVID. Gracias igualmente a quienes nos enriquecieron con sus reflexiones, que sin lugar a dudas servirán para seguir denunciando y condenando el preocupante fenómeno de la explotación laboral infantil, que, como recordó recientemente el Papa Francisco, se ha convertido en un flagelo que hiere cruelmente la existencia digna y el desarrollo armónico de los más pequeños, limitando considerablemente sus oportunidades de futuro. Este aspecto ha sido puesto de relieve sabiamente en el título de la reunión de hoy. Erradicar el trabajo infantil significa construir un futuro mejor, por dos razones. En primer lugar, porque liberando a los menores de la explotación laboral, permitimos que germinen provechosamente todas sus capacidades a su debido tiempo, sin acelerar forzosamente su maduración. En segundo lugar, sin explotación se logrará un porvenir mejor no solo para los propios menores, sino también para toda la sociedad, dado que los niños y jóvenes de hoy serán nuestros gobernantes del mañana, los futuros administradores de nuestra casa común. Por lo tanto, respetar el tiempo de formación de los pequeños, su crecimiento adecuado y no obligarlos a trabajar tempranamente, significa proteger su dignidad y promover la prosperidad de nuestra sociedad. En este contexto, cuando este seminario está a punto de concluir, permítanme unos breves comentarios que han sido brindadas, que no aspiran sino a recoger las numerosas y relevantes reflexiones que han sido brindadas por los egregios oradores que me han precedido en el uso de la palabra. Primero, ante todo, creo importante subrayar que poner fin al trabajo infantil es una cuestión que conlleva defender los derechos fundamentales de los niños. Ellos no pueden ser explotados laboralmente. La infancia es un tiempo precioso para ir a la escuela y recibir una educación justa y esmerada que permita el desarrollo armónico y completo de su personalidad. La Convención de los Derechos del Niño de las Naciones Unidas reconoce estos derechos y corresponde a cada uno de nosotros salvaguardar y favorecer su respeto para que cada niño crezca en el seno de la familia en un ambiente de felicidad, amor y comprensión. Se comprende entonces que la explotación laboral infantil sea la primera violación grave de los derechos fundamentales de la niñez, porque impide el goce efectivo de los mismos. En segundo lugar, poner fin al trabajo infantil es una cuestión de justicia social. Esto entraña proteger y valorar el trabajo de los padres con salarios justos, de modo que no sea necesario que los niños contribuyan al mantenimiento del hogar con su aportación económica. Se vuelve, pues, imperioso defender el empleo, preservar sus fuentes, crear otras nuevas en proporción al crecimiento de la viabilidad económica y asegurar la dignidad del trabajo mismo. De esta manera, cada adulto podrá proveer a su propio sustento y a la subsistencia de su familia. Así será posible que los pequeños custodien y cultiven sus sueños, tengan tiempo para jugar, ir a la escuela, entrenar y desarrollar sus potencialidades en ámbitos de concordia y serenidad. Acabar con el trabajo infantil es, por tanto, un imperativo ético que debe sacudir nuestra conciencia. De ahí que la comunidad internacional se esfuerce para que los pequeños no tomen en sus manos herramientas de trabajo. Han de utilizar más bien bolígrafos, leer libros, pintar dibujos, desplegar su fantasía. Esto es lo que todo padre desea para sus hijos y nietos. Y no otra ha de ser la aspiración de una sociedad que ambiciona llamarse humana y tener la dignidad de la persona como auténtico emblema. Esto ha de llevarnos a sentirnos desafiados y conmovidos por el sufrimiento de los menores explotados laboralmente. Ha de animarnos asimismo a actuar para que nadie en el mundo se sienta abrumado por una desesperación de tal envergadura que obligue a sus hijos pequeños a trabajar. Cuando los niños son explotados, esclavizados, privados de sus sueños y de su futuro, no es una familia la que se encuentra atenazada, es toda la sociedad la que ha sido derrotada. Todos somos perdedores si no comprendemos que es imprescindible tutelar la infancia y librarla del yugo de la explotación laboral. Una explotación que nos remonta a periodos vetustos y oscuros de la historia, cuando la esclavitud era moneda de curso legal. Hoy, por el contrario, si queremos proclamar que hemos progresado, no solo hemos de mirar a los avances científicos o al desarrollo técnico. Hemos de pensar ante todo en nuestra talla ética, la cual va unida a la defensa de los derechos fundamentales de la infancia y a la serenidad y felicidad de los menores. Al final de nuestra reunión quisiera agradecerles su participación y todas las iniciativas que se están haciendo para que este año internacional de la erradicación del trabajo infantil produzca frutos abundantes, de modo que se renueve la esperanza de que los corazones de los responsables políticos y de cuantos están llamados a orientar la acción de los gobiernos y de la entera comunidad internacional se sientan inquietos mientras haya un solo niño en nuestro planeta que sufra despiadadas condiciones de explotación laboral, unas condiciones que los minusvaloran y lesionan al hacerlos crecer demasiado rápido. Que ninguno de nosotros se sienta con la conciencia limpia si nuestro hermano menor es vejado y esclavizado. A ello nos ayudará a recordar la advertencia del Señor en el Evangelio. En verdad os digo que cuanto hicisteis a uno de estos hermanos míos más pequeños, a mí me lo hicisteis. Muchas gracias. Fernando.
Sí.
Fernando.
Perdonad, pero es que las condiciones de internet aquí son dificultosas. Gracias por haber leído mis palabras y me siento muy honrado de haber podido participar a través de la voz de Monseñor Segundo. Perdonen la la precariedad de Internet en donde me encuentro, pero todo ha sido leído y me doy por muy satisfecho.
Y muy bonito, Fernando, tu escrito, muy bonito. Ha gustado mucho. Se nota.
Thank you very much. We are going now to the final blessing. Your Eminence, you have the final words and the final blessing to all of us.
I think at this hour, with your great patience and tolerance, we've kind of exceeded by about 10 minutes, but that's not much. Seeing the enthusiasm with which you began after lunch. So we just want to thank all of you, those connected virtually and those here present in the hall, for your presence in the first place, for your interventions and all. The time being what it is, as you can recognize, there wasn't much room for exchange, for conversation among us. That's probably the only part that was missing, and that would have been enriched by, but the time being what it is, we like to ask for your understanding and forgive us for this. Next time we'll probably shorten the lunch time so that we could begin. We can begin slightly earlier. But I just want to thank all of you for coming and for the preparations that you put into your presentations and everything, and wish all of you God's blessings on all what you're doing, your endeavors and your engagements and all, and recognize that there's always a partner for everything that you do in this dicastery. We always be of support. Either we come on board with your initiatives, what you're doing, or we invite you to support what we're doing. But kindly recognize the relationship that has been built. A lot of you talked about networks. That's part of it. So thank you again, and I wish you God's speed for those who need to travel. Safe return, safe travel to your dear ones, and do carry the blessing that the Pope gave to us this morning with you wherever you go. And may God bless and keep all of you. Amen.